Ready when you are.
Hypercausts, Remorse, and the Cambridge Latin Course. All on this week's volcanic episode of I'll Explain Later, the Doctor Who podcast that aims to learn a new word as it dies, with your hosts John West
and Matt Needer. On tonight's programme, armed with just a water pistol, the 10th Doctor racks up his biggest body count yet. Even Phil Davis didn't see that one coming. Meanwhile, everyone thinks Donna's Welsh, but something tells me it's the Scottish people we need to be keeping an eye on in this episode. We make a series of limited and dull prophecies about the Fires of Pompeii. Hello, John.
Matt. How are you?
I'm all right. I was trying to remember back to our days of learning Latin at school. What was it? Salve? Okay, how do you greet some?
Salve clamavi tu
There you go. Okay, you
yes.
already have retained more of that than I have. But yes, well, salve, John. I won't greet the listeners and viewers that way. Hello, listeners. Hello, viewers. Hope everyone's doing well. Yeah, we're back. We're in
Salve Equitarius.
Oh God.
Yeah, I doubt very much that means we're recording this on a Sunday, late Sunday morning, and there was a very sticky moment where I was sat down, ready, everything was fine, and I realised I was still wearing my pajamas, which I wasn't trying to sort of channel AdResic or anything during this particular record. So
went
and
when we're in our remote configuration, it doesn't matter what you're wearing from the waist downwards.
And I from the waist up, I'm podcast ready.
Excellent. Well, that's all we need. That's all we need to talk about what we're talking about this week, which is the Fires of Pompeii, 10th Doctor episode.
Yes.
This sort of ties interestingly, actually, with the conversation we were having last week when we were looking at the Crusade, I think, about historical stories. I think it came up briefly when we were talking about it. So quite a lot to talk about there. But before we get into it, John, have you got the stats? When did this go out?
Yeah, so obviously this is the fourth season of New Who. So we're talking 2008. This was broadcast on the 12th of April, 2008, Series 4. So, of course, you got David Tennant as the Doctor, Donna Noble, played by Catherine Tate, as the companion. The title sort of gives away what it's about, the Fires of Pompeii. Obviously, it's a sort of classic sort of chef's kiss of a concept. The Doctor and his companion arrive in Pompeii on Volcano Day, or around within 24 hours and change of Volcano Day. And written by James Moran, or at least he has the credit, very heavy polish / rewrite by Russell T Davies, as I'm sure we will discuss, directed by Colin Teague. The Doctor and Donna, they arrive. They think they've arrived in ancient Rome. They're actually in Pompeii at 79 AD. The volcano is about to erupt. There's a lot of set to between Donna and the Doctor about whether he can warn everyone and evacuate the city. He claims this is a fixed point in time and his hands are tied. But then they notice some alien shenanigans and some strange prophecies among the soothsayers of the city. And the Doctor and Donna have to investigate that precisely because this eruption of Vesuvius and the burying of Pompeii is meant to be a fixed point in time. The Doctor is concerned that these aliens are going to interfere with it. It turns out that it's a bit more complicated than that. But there's lots of themes here about agency, intervention. We get our old friend, the trolley problem, popping up. But also the opportunity to spend some time in ancient Rome, lots of jokes, some pretty fun sort of rock monsters, soothsayers, a an all-female cult. There's a lot going on here, and you can tell that a great deal of fun was had by all. But was fun had by us watching it? And I suppose we tend to kick off with our overall view of what we thought of this. So having summarised, I hope to your satisfaction, I'll pass the baton over to you to give us a kind of volcanic take on it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I watched this when it went out in 2008. I haven't watched it since. That's a topic we should put a pin in to talk about in a future episode. Is I don't rewatch the new series that often, the modern series, and I don't say that as a judgment. It's just not what I reach for sometimes when I want to watch Doctor Who. Anyway, that's by the by. I'd not seen it. I remember this being pretty good at the time, but it wasn't one that sort of necessarily sits in my memory as one of the sort of standouts of the first Russell T Davies era. So yeah, I watched it the other night. I think it's absolutely fantastic. I think it's brilliant. And it moves along at a hell of a clip. It's incredibly dense in the way that you sort of pointed out. It's, there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
I think, and I was watching it sort of coming quite soon off our discussion last week about The Crusade, where we were talking about what we want from a sort of historical story. And, in the second half of the episode, we listed off what we thought were all of the archetypes for a Doctor Who story set in the past of Earth history. And it was quite interesting then to watch this and realize this is almost like a tick box that does all of the things that we listed that they do in history stories, they do in here. So we have the separation from the TARDIS. We have straight off the bat, they lose the TARDIS and they need to get it back. We have the separation of the Doctor and his companion, in this case where Donna gets kidnapped by the all-female cult. We have the sort of local intrigue of what's going on with the sort of soothsayers going on. We have the alien intervention when it's revealed that there's these. When you said rock monsters just now, my mind just went straight to rock lobster. So there you go. But we have the pyrovillians, the rock monsters that are living in the lava, and then at the end,
so it does make you think either of like Van Halen, monsters of
legends,
rock, or sort of Utri-esque rock stars who we learned later.
Yeah. So to be clear,
weren't quite so
to be clear, we are specifically talking.
We're talking about the pyroviles,
right? A race of magma beings. A magma or a rock? Anyway, again, distracted. So yeah, we have the alien race that have somehow sort of worked their way into this situation, and then at the end. In what is a big twist, it is the Doctor that has to push the button that causes Vesuvius to erupt and kills all those people, which is a bit of a flex. Yeah. Although obviously the dilemma for him is that it's do you push the button and destroy Pompeii, or do you not push the button and let the whole Earth get destroyed? So that's the dramatic thing there. So yeah, I kind of think it's like. Whether or not it's my favourite Doctor Who story set in the past, that's something I'll probably have to think a lot more of, but a lot more on. But I think it's almost like the ultimate history episode in that it literally looks at every single shape that it can that the story can take. And I think in cramming all of those elements together, the pacing of it is really, really exciting because there's basically a twist or a turn or something unexpected happens, at almost every beat of the story. I think the scene where the Doctor goes to visit Caecilius, played by Peter Capaldi, probably talk about him in a bit more detail shortly, and indeed in plenty of other episodes, I'll explain later. The scene where the Doctor goes to his house and Lucius, played by Phil Davis, turns up, and it's quite tense. Where obviously Lucius is up to something, Caecilius is almost like the bystander in this, and then the Doctor's trying to get information about what's going on. But that scene is incredible because it almost there's just a series of amazing beats that completely wrong foot you. There's first of all the Doctor's about to get back into the TARDIS. Then Caecilius reveals that he's made this marble circuit board, which piques the Doctor's attention. Then Lucius turns up. And then Lucius and, is it Evangelina, Caecilius' daughter, who has
Yep.
the gift of prophecy as well. Then basically,
Evelina.
Sorry, yes, that's it. Evelina. They make a series of prophecies, basically reading the Doctor's mind. So when that line comes out, oh, you Doctor, man from Gallifrey, and it's like, whoa, okay, this has gone somewhere completely different. And it really doesn't let up all the way through to this crunching moment where you realize that it is the doctor having said, this is a fixed point in time, this has to happen. He invests so much in sort of explaining to Donna that like he is not going to be able to save the people here, and that's the sort of moral dilemma that plays out in the debate between the Doctor and Donna, to then get to the point where he says, this has to happen, these people have to die, and I'm going to need to be the one to push the button in order to make it happen. It ratchets up to a level of intensity that I like this run of Doctor Who, but I don't always associate it with being this emotionally intense. And I just think the last act of it is absolutely extraordinary. So I think this is significantly better than I remember it, and I think it's, in terms of just getting as much juice as possible out of its setting. I think it's it's quite a remarkable achievement, really. But anyway, I've waffled on enough. John, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think this is exceptional. I think there's a real alchemy in series 4, which we've spoken about before.
Yeah.
It's no mistake that, again, without sort of lifting up that rock and looking at the creepy crawlies again, but for the 60th specials, getting back Tennant and Tate together, the chemistry is so watchable, and it seems to be that everyone raises their game. It's interesting. I went back to the Ben Cook book, the Writer's Tale, where he engages in this huge email correspondence with Russell T Davies, focusing in no small part, largely in fact, on this series,
this episode,
series 4.
Actually.
Yeah, this episode features a lot, and we'll speak a little bit more about that, I suspect. But he talks about the initial read-throughs. Russell T Davies writes to Ben Cook about the read-throughs of the initial read-throughs of Series 4 with Tennant and Tate, and just how they're lifting each other's game, and that really conditions how he then writes as well. Because there's so many jokes in this. I mean, and funny jokes, right? I think this is super funny. I mean, he really. We often speak about, Moffat as having the kind of sitcom chops and being a funny writer, and we've praised his skill with comedy a lot in recent episodes. This is the funniest of them all, I think. Maybe it speaks a little bit more to my love of dad jokes. I mean, going shopping down TK Maximus and that sort of stuff. But I felt this was an absolute hoot.
I mean, a lot of the jokes, they're sort of reference jokes, aren't they? In terms of like reference, and also like all the I am Spartacus too. I
am also Spartacus. It is. Maybe that's the case, but I feel like it's all. The thing is, as well, that those kind of jokes done against such a lush background, right? I mean, just visually. I mean, obviously, they did go to Italy to film this at the Cinecittà studios. They'd had a major fire, but there were still loads of the sets that were available. It was, of course, famously used for HBO's Rome series. This set, and it just looks fantastic.
It looks amazing. Yeah,
right? I mean, it's so beautiful. But not only that, I mean, obviously, we would expect. This was filmed in. This was filmed in standard.
Yeah,
like
standard def.
High definition, standard definition.
No, just
right?
standard definition. It wasn't even in. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was like, and so there's a limit to how much it can be upscaled or improved or whatever. But I still felt that the CGI, probably because it was in standard definition, looked really great. I thought the stone monsters with their kind of, they looked more ancient. They looked Trojan or ancient Greek rather than Roman, which I felt was kind of appropriate because they'd been buried for so many years. So they had this kind of slightly other aspect to them, but it still was ancient, Europe
Yeah.
coded. I thought they looked great. I loved again, in the writer's tale, Russell T Davies talks a lot about how he wants more soothsayers, and so he's sort of created this pretty blatant Sisterhood of Khan
Yeah.
ripoff.
Yeah.
In the kind of Sibyllines, right? The Sibylline all-female cult. And I think that was really smart for a couple of reasons, because in an incredibly patriarchal society, it created a whole slew of female characters with agency.
Yes.
That was quite a clever thing to do. Obviously, Donna's there as well, but it just added. They don't really serve much for the plot. You could probably get away with just having Phil Davis's Lucius,
But it stops it all being men in
terms of
togas. Basically, it's like
exactly, and gives an air of mystery, and a rare example of Murray Gold, I feel, really nailing the brief as well. I feel like some of the kind of spooky chanting music that he's created around the Sibyllines is actually pretty effective.
yeah, music's pretty good in this. I made a note of that.
I would agree. I think Murray Gold brings his A game to this one, and I think some of his kind of typical bombast lends itself to what you want for, like, when Lucius arrived,
Yes.
you know, there's sort of, it lends itself to the kind
Brassiness.
of sword and sandals epic 1950s, 1960s.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, if there's
Hollywood
a story that earns sort of brassy bombast, it's this big time. You know, it's like, yeah,
Totally.
it's an ancient Roman city with a volcano right at the end. I mean, it's
completely. But then, I feel like this also thematically works brilliant. I mean, we never stop talking about how much we love the Aztecs and the sort of discourse on cultural relativism, cultural imperialism that has. And although it's a somewhat lighter touch, it definitely goes there
yeah,
here. Imperialism is writ large over the fact that this is ancient Rome. The Pyroviles themselves want to create an empire. There's the sort of imperialist arrogance of the Doctor as a Time Lord who knows how everything should be. And I feel that is beautifully punctured by Donna,
Yeah.
who constantly questions all of that.
Oh
right?
yeah. And Donna's moral outrage. I mean, it's interesting because in terms of where we're at with Donna at this point in the series, you know, this is only her third outing on screen. We've seen her in, you know, The Runaway Bride a couple of years earlier, and then Partners in Crime. You know, one of which is a, you know, Christmas sort of comedy special, and you know, Partners in Crime very much the sort of RTD Japes kind of season opener. So this is where actually, you know, Donna as a dramatic kind of creation really sort of comes to the fore. And you know, as you say, it's full of, it's coming back to what you're saying about the jokes, it's full of dad jokes, but it's like what it needs is a deft comic touch in order to be able to land it. And so it's like she's very good at doing that here, because obviously she's an incredibly experienced like comedic performer. But what's new in her trajectory in Doctor Who is like, yeah, the serious, like searing moral outrage, and you know the demands that she makes, and you know, ultimately she's the one who tells the Doctor to go back and rescue Caecilius and his family when he is prepared to sort of abandon them at that point, which is, you know, dark. It's a dark thing to contemplate about the character of the Doctor at this point, but it's her like searing outrage which is what persuades him to change his mind.
Oh,
and she lands it amazingly.
Just from but I mean, just from a performance perspective, Tate's range here is wild.
It's knockout,
like, it's sort of Mariah Carey-esque in terms of the kind of dramatic octaves that she's able to go through. Her despair and sadness and outrage set against her, light but beautifully targeted comedic touch. I mean, she's just fantastic in this, which isn't a surprise for anyone who's watched any of her stuff within Doctor Who and outside of her awful sketch show. That's a discussion for another time. But she's super talented comic actor, and the range into that seriousness. I think as well, it's always very effective when a comic, and someone who's primarily known as a comic, is able to genuinely land the seriousness, because the kind of the whiplash from genuinely being able to land the comedy through to genuinely being able to do the dramatic, that going in those directions and showing that breadth is always particularly, it's not just that it's impressive, but it feels very
Yeah.
human as well. Most people are not just funny or just sad or just serious. They're a range of those things. So
Look, and
it's always very effective. But more than that, I think, if you think back to the Aztecs, where Barbara wants to, um, she probably would say, bring 20th century liberal enlightenment to that era. You could also say impose an outside moral sort of compass on them.
yeah.
And that story looks into that. I feel like that's dealt with, and very deftly, in the exchanges where she's sort of wanting to tell people, and he said, well, what are you going to do? Run up to them and say that it's the end of the world? You'll sound like a mad person,
Yeah.
right? And there's that, yeah, okay, nobody's going to be faced with the situation of how, traveling with a mad chap with two hearts and landing in the ancient Roman Empire in 79 AD in Pompeii. Very unlikely to pertain to anyone watching it.
Let's not rule it out. We live in strange
nonetheless,
times.
the idea that, well, indeed, but that's exactly my point. We live in strange times. The idea that you might be saying something which is absolutely credible, absolutely based in cold hard fact, where you feel you have a moral responsibility to share your message, and yet you're shouting it, and to everybody else, because of the conditions of the time, you sound like the mad person, or you're fundamentally unable to convince them, feels like a very relevant point in this day and age. And so that question of how do you communicate to an audience that is not ready or not aligned or out of phase with what it is you're about to say. Yeah, you're not going to be in Pompeii in 79 AD, but there'll be plenty of occasions where you feel like Donna in that moment with your truth, trying to make it real, and failing to connect it.
Well,
and so that's why this feels like an evergreen thing. It would be so easy to say, well, how often are people going to find themselves in this particular bind? But you can just think a bit more broadly about, and I don't even just mean on the political level. I mean, but just on a personal level, those occasions where you're absolutely certain of something, and deep in your bones that you have the truth on your side, and you desperately need to persuade people, and for whatever reason you're just unable to. That felt like a very human thing to kind of explore.
Well, it's also something,
and that's just one bit of this.
But it's also something that, from the Doctor's perspective, I mean, this series in particular kind of looks at a lot. And obviously, we're building towards this, the kind of Time Lord victorious kind of run, out of the end of this and into the special, the Waters of Mars and the Regeneration specials coming up.
Yeah.
And as you say, like, it looks at the arrogance, or it looks at the sort of almost elitism of, like, the Doctor as the Lord who, gets to say what is and isn't happening and ultimately has to make the decision at the end. But also, what you're saying about, you being right but sounding like the mad person, I mean, that's something that comes up quite a lot in this series as well. I was also thinking of that incredible bit in Midnight, sort of later this series, where the Doctor is trying to warn the people on that craft about what's going on. And they're all saying, well, why should we listen to you? And the only thing he can say is, because I'm clever. And I always think that's, like, such a remarkable moment, because it's like he is absolutely right, and yet in that moment he has completely lost the argument. And that's an interest, as you say, especially now, that's an interesting thing to sort of be playing with, to sort of like to realize that, you know, the truth is a losing hand in that sense is interesting. But
Yeah.
also, I mean, just what we were saying earlier about how, you know, this doesn't take a beat of its plot development for granted. It's also interesting that the Doctor, when the Doctor's saying to Donna, you can't go around saying it's the end of the world, they think of you as one of those mad soothsayers. And of course, they're being observed by the soothsayers, who then say like, oh, well, the Doctor, he mocks us, you know, this guy's an enemy, and just sets up that dynamic. So there's almost like like there are bits of this where there's almost like not a sentence out of place in terms of what it's doing and how it's developing that story. But also, actually,
Yeah,
sorry,
and
just to circle,
just to come back very quickly to the kind of soothsay off between Evelina and Lucius in that scene
Such a
where
good
they're in
scene.
Caecilius's house, and they're both sort of, it's like a rap battle, isn't it? And there's also the kind of the gnomic utterances off between Lucius and the Doctor. But the sun will surely rise. Damn, sir.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
all that stuff. I mean, I'm a sucker for that kind of playing with form. But also just I know exactly what's going to happen because I've seen this before. And I have rewatched it more recently than you. I watched it for this, but like I have seen it maybe 4 or 5 times since broadcast. And even when, you know, Evelina, who is brilliantly played, by the way, by Francesca Fowler, like, you
That's a
know,
great performance.
especially the dreamlike trance state that she's in when she's having visions. And Phil Davis as Lucius is just on sort of terrifying form. But when, you know, she says, I see you, you know, a lord of time, and he says, man of Gallifrey. I know that that's coming, and I still get chills. It's like, oh my God, like there's still the because of the performances, because everything is just bolted on, because it there's not an ounce of fat on it. You still manage to suspend your disbelief rewatching it, and I find, you know, it's just
Well, just, I mean, that
it's just
whole
spellbinding,
sequence
really.
is just a whole sort of like, well, that escalated quickly kind of moment in terms of just like
Yeah.
the layered weirdness of like, you know, they've literally gone into this guy's house in order to get the TARDIS back. And yet, you know, here we are, and, you know, they seem to know all about how, you know, he's a Time Lord from Gallifrey. And yeah, it's just, there's a ton going on.
I think as well that, you know, obviously we talked about the sort of moral relativism clash, almost culture clash, or and this truth stuff. But there is also, you know, the kind of philosophy 101 trolley problem here at the end. But it's not just a trolley problem. I mean, if anybody is unfamiliar, the idea being that you've got the sort of trolley or tram hurtling towards one person lying on a track, or no, like 5 people lying on a track, and you can pull a lever which would deviate the tram, which would only kill one person. So do you actively choose to kill the one person or let the 5 die? Which is a ludicrous moral argument, because obviously you pull the lever and the one person dies, I believe. But that's the
Solved.
utilitarian in me, I suppose. Yeah. But there's a wonderful. I haven't watched The Good Place, but there's a wonderful scene in that where the Ted Danson character says, "Isn't there something you can do where everybody dies?" Wouldn't that be the preferable outcome? But yeah, so. But I think it's beyond that. I mean, obviously it is a trolley problem, and that's a relatively easy concept and it's done in such a way through the prism of a sci-fi adventure show that anybody could understand. But it's much more than that, because obviously the Doctor keeps going on about how this is a fixed point in time. The reason why none of the people who have inhaled the vapors and timey-wimey managed to get visions of the future, the reason none of them can see this eruption is because in current state it won't happen. It takes the Doctor doing something. So what I think that's really interesting is that because I think there is a criticism of this, that the fixed point in time thing creates a kind of moral accountability sink for the Doctor, where he can just go, well, you know, what can I do?
Yeah.
But I think it's much more interesting than that. It says that, you know, actually this moment wasn't written in stone other than the Doctor having to exercise his agency in order for this to happen. And what that says is that what it's sort of telling you is that anything that ever happened required someone's agency at some point to either let it happen or not let
Yeah.
it happen. And when you see events careering together and you're not sure which direction to take, you have to take what it's saying is you have to take responsibility for your actions, because your actions, the things you do, the decisions you make, the trade-offs that you morally accommodate yourself to have consequences, and they really are written in stone. So I think it's much more about the viewer than it is about the Doctor. It's saying that you have choices, you have options, you have agency. These things are only written in stone once you've made those choices. So, and those choices aren't necessarily going to be easy. They may involve trade-offs. I mean, here 20,000 die so that millions can
Yeah.
live. Hopefully, I hope that neither of our listeners is ever put in that position. But it's still a very striking sort of treatise on there may be trade-offs, there may be difficulties, but you have agency. You can shape the world with the decisions you make. And I find that an oddly upbeat reading.
Yeah.
Obviously, it becomes less upbeat when you see what the consequences of those actions are. You see the genuine terror in the eyes of the children. They really, I think they do a good job to linger on
Yeah,
that.
I was
They
going to say, I
show
made a note of
the
that.
ash falling, the terror of Donna trying to scoop up children, their mothers instead going, no, like scooping them back again, saying, no, I will protect them. They don't flinch away from that horror. They don't flinch away from the consequence of the Doctor and Donna's decision. Because eventually, of course, she does take the Doctor's hand in order to push the MacGuffin plunger that creates this whole thing. And I think that in that moment, it also decides very briefly and without pressing too hard on it to be pretty fucking anti-war.
Yeah.
Like it's sort of saying, you don't do this lightly. These are, if we are going to press buttons and create death, you have to be able to live with the consequences, and this is what that is.
Absolutely. And it's also interesting, I mean, because we've got the obviously the Doctor brings up a bit of his sort of time war kind of scar tissue in this when he's discussing how he's seen everyone die, and there's there's a touch of that here. But I mean, I made a note of that like this episode runs long. I think it's about 48 minutes rather than 45. And I found it was striking, just how much it lingers on the sheer fucking horror and death of it all. And it is absolutely, it does not attempt to wave some sort of magic wand to convince you that it's, that the Doctor making what in that moment, seems to be the correct decision is nevertheless a nice or even a good one in terms of what happens from it all. It's sort of interesting. I'm glad you picked up on the fixed point in time sort of question, because I've sort of grappled with that phrase a bit. There's part of me that wants to think that it's a slightly more sort of flexible and useful sort of dramatically sort of update of Hartnell saying you can't change history, not one line, which is is quite sort of that's quite a rigid sort of parameter of like, and I think when Hartnell says that, it's never quite clear to me, at least, and I like the ambiguity of this, of whether he's saying it is not possible to change history, whatever happens, this is all fixed, or whether or not he's saying you shouldn't. It is not for you to impose your moral judgment in this situation where there was a completely sort of different prevailing ethos. And I think the sort of fixed point in time, as you say, there's a kind of moral accountability to it, as well as there is like a dramatic one in terms of going like, this is why I'm not going to act now. I mean, it's sort of, and it's it's a rich theme in sci-fi. I always forget the name of the author of this short story. and I'm sure if we've got any sort of literary sci-fi fans in our listenership, they'll be able to correct me on this. But there's an amazing sci-fi short story called "Let's All Go to Golgotha" that I remember reading when we were at school, which is about a time travel tourist agency that takes people back to various points in history, and a group of people want to go back and see the crucifixion of Jesus. And so they're all given costumes and they're all given a script saying, like, right, when Pilate shouts out, who do you want to save? You all have to shout, no, crucify him. We want Barabbas. And so they go back, the tourists go back and they play their part and they follow the script. And when they look around, they realize that every single person in the room, in the crowd, is also a time traveling tourist, and that they've collectively taken the responsibility to crucify Jesus. And it absolutely blew my mind that when I was reading it at school. And it's sort of interesting.
Yeah.
There's a touch of that here as well.
Gary Kilworth.
Is that Gary Kilworth? That would not have been a name that I would have thought of. I don't know if it holds up as literature to read it now, but just as a concept, it sort of blew my mind when I was a
Well,
kid.
no one needs to read it now, do they? They've heard you.
Spoilers, yeah, big time. But there's absolutely a touch of that here of just like, and again, Tennant plays it so well of just like the sort of the sick kind of crunching of like, oh God, it's me, I'm the one that does it. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, and the weight of that responsibility, like until Donna puts her hands, like he's happy to let that slide, but as soon as he realizes he has to do it, it becomes a very different Doctor that you see. The arrogance falls away completely.
Yeah.
His carapace is gone. He's just a quivering wreck. He may even be unable to make the decision. It's only when Donna, who has been the moral force throughout the episode, says, no, this is a decision that needs. I mean, she's a far purer moral utilitarian than he is, right? She's saying, let's get everybody out. But at the same time, when faced with the trolley problem choice, she doesn't flinch.
Yeah, she knows.
She's a less damaged and therefore far surer moral compass. And the Doctor, to be fair, and this is why the character development is so good, directly acknowledges this at the end of the episode, right? He acknowledges that and sort of formally welcomes her as a kind of permanent companion, let's say. So I think that's very effective. It's worth saying, having sort of waded sort of waist deep into the kind of moral treacle of this, just how much fun this episode is. I mean, we also have not once, but twice, the Doctor defeating a lava monster with a water pistol. Yes. And the deft is a word you've used earlier, but the deftness with which this weaves comedy, adventure, and sort of serious moral ballast is basically the best of Doctor Who. I mean, that is the fact that it manages to do everything that we've just said, while also playing a little pastiche of Hollywood's sword and sandals epics, giving us some paranormal mystery, great design, beautiful to look at. All the costumes are fantastic. We haven't even talked about Peter Capaldi. We haven't even talked about Phil Cornwell, who has a blink and you'll miss it. He's there for 2 jokes. We haven't talked about any of the TARDIS circuitry, language circuits stuff, where when they actually speak Latin, it sounds like they sound Welsh to everybody, which gives Capaldi the wonderful opportunity. Oh, there's lovely for you. Capaldi in this is, by the way, Capaldi obviously did this because he was desperate to be in Doctor Who, right? It's not a rich, beautiful part, and yet he shows his range here because he's so often cast as dark or mercurial or
gruff manipulator.
Or just a bit of an arsehole. And here he's portrayed as a family man who's desperate to sort of do better for his family, and just really no side to him. And he does that just so beautifully. And when they go back, when you see them cowering just oh my god, it's just like the the realization on his face that, my family is going to die. There's nothing I can do for
Mm.
them. There's no words there. It's just all in Capaldi's face. It's a wonderful bit of acting.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that sort of in his the other sort of, I would say, two contributions to the Whoniverse, if we're going to call it that, that he puts. I mean, the obviously he's got an amazing turn in Tortured Children of Earth, but almost like
Yeah,
at that.
Frobisher.
Yeah, where he's, I mean, obviously it becomes all about his moral cowardice, but he very much starts off in the sort of Malcolm Tucker kind of mode slightly in terms of what that storyline is like. What if Malcolm Tucker discovered the moral cost of this all at the end? And it's sort of similarly, his 12th Doctor sort of plays the Doctor in a Peter Capaldi-ish kind of way, in a way that you would sort of anticipate that he would do. So yeah, you're right, to see him play this sort of quite gentle, sort of essentially family man and small business owner, which is kind of the role here, is nice. It's also worth. I mean, it's like she doesn't really do very much. So it's not there's not that much to talk about, I would say, but. Yeah, striking to see Karen Gillan in this. Earlier on, where obviously, I've not watched this since 2008. So obviously, it's not like her character particularly sort of stood out in my mind when they sort of brought her into the show as a companion later. But it's like to look back at it now, and yeah, obviously very sort of striking features to go like, oh my god, it's Karen Gillan. So yeah, in terms of how this episode was mined for future long running cast members, it's it's quite interesting that.
But just also the design work, like having the eyes sort of hennaed onto the back
Oh
of their
yeah,
hands so that when they're having visions, they cover their eyes, but there are still
so
eyes.
cheap but
It's
so effective.
conceptually
Yeah,
clever, super creepy,
yeah,
brilliant.
and probably cost about 50p. It's like, yeah, perfect.
Yeah, exactly. When I mean, a lot of money is spent on this episode, but yes, they're still making creative decisions at the much cheaper end of the scale that absolutely like it's sort of. I mean, this feels sort of to me. Can they
Yeah,
miss? It's just sort of everything seems to be firing on all cylinders. Worth just as we're coming to the end of the discussion, discussing the writing.
yeah,
Obviously, James Moran is the credited writer, and by both Russell T Davies accounts and his own, that there's fascinatingly an email from James Moran, which is with his permission included in the writer's tale, where he says it is always weird to see your writing being rewritten. And yet I can see that every change has been in the service of the story that I wanted to tell. Wish I'd thought of the water pistol thing. That would have been great. And I feel that he does deserve. I think a lot of people, this is just a Russell T Davies script. It's got James Moran's name on it. The bones of what he wanted, the shape of it, like them walking through the shopping streets at the beginning and having that discussion. The words are completely different. The writer's tale even shows you two alternatives of this: James Moran's original, Russell T Davies polish. And yeah, the words are more or less completely different. But the shape of it, the thread of it is very much there. Russell T Davies says in one of the emails to Ben Cook, rather uncharitably, I think, I feel this would have been a better. Although I suppose a writer has to think this, otherwise, why do you put pen to paper? But I feel this would have been a better script if I'd started it, and if this had been my project all the way through. I mean, I'd be astonished if this could be much.
I was going to say, in
but
terms of what lands on screen, it's like, yeah, I doubt it.
I just can't agree. I think that there is, as with Midnight and a completely different set of constraints, the set of constraints, the having to rework something, there's an alchemy in that, and it does bring another person's view into it. Yes, the dialogue is completely ripped up. Yes, Russell T Davies introduces the Sibylline Order, and there's obviously much of it that is his. Clearly, he should get a co-writer credit, but it's fascinating to me that much of the kind of skeleton of it is sort of there with James Moran's work, and he deserves the credit for
Well,
that
I'd
too.
also say, I mean, it's like that having, we've praised the structure of this and just how just like, absolutely watertight it is. And Russell T Davies can do watertight structure, but he doesn't always. And I would say he, if I have a critique of him, it's that he doesn't do it often enough, frankly. So it's like if we are looking at, the RTD dialogue, put on a pre-worked out, pretty tight structure, then for me, that's the best of all worlds.
Now let's have a look at a few examples. Metella est mater. Metella is the mother. Caecilius est pater. Caecilius is the father. Quintus est filius. Quintus is the son. Grumio est coquus. Grumio is the cook.
Okay, so it's another week where you have listened to our pleas at the end of every episode, and we have some correspondence. So we had an email this week from a long time listener, and he's obviously corresponded with us before as well. Nick DeGaris, who got in touch to say, "Hello again. Just listened to Enlightenment and had a cracking time. Oh, that's nice. I love this story, but I can also agree the major flaws you pointed out. I also agree that while I don't really like god creatures coming into stories, as it brings otherworldly threats that get so big they lose meaning, I also recognise how important these stories are to offer balance. I wanted to follow up your discussion about Five's TARDIS team, though, presumably meaning Fifth Doctors. They keep trying to make four-person teams work, and I don't think they ever do. With Hartnell, he needed it, but with Davison and Whittaker, there's always at least one spare an episode, and it gets so frustrating. How many times was Nyssa left in the TARDIS to rot? I don't know if it can ever work successfully. I'd love to hear your thoughts. All the best, Nick." Well, thank you so much for that. I'm glad you enjoyed the episode. And yeah, it's an interesting point that I think we've danced around on a few episodes, particularly when we're talking about sort of the Davison TARDIS crew, but we've never really addressed head on. John, do you think there is an optimal number of regular characters in Doctor Who? And if so, what is that number?
I don't. It's a very good question. I think that there probably is an optimal number, and it's probably two, like the Doctor plus one companion. I think if we look at truly Imperial phase, but I think no. Okay, so it depends what the format of the show is, which is a bit of a cop-out question. But I think if you've got the Doctor and the TARDIS landing somewhere new every week, it works best when it's two.
Yeah.
So you've got
two characters or two companions?
No, two. Sorry, the Doctor plus one companion. So one companion. I think if you think about the Doctor and Sarah Jane, the Doctor and Rose, the Doctor and Donna, I feel like that sort of iconic picture, publicity still of the Doctor and a companion leaning out of the TARDIS door, sort of works best. And you are able, particularly I think in single story 45-minute episodes, which we've had broadly speaking since the new era, I just don't think that it particularly works to take the oxygen out of the interaction around those two characters. I feel like the Whittaker TARDIS crew, which I think Nick alluded to. Nick alluded to, like, there's always one of them that's a spare prick at a wedding. And then when you get to, even I have to say, and this is an era of the show that I really didn't enjoy, but the Matt Smith era, I felt once Arthur Darvill was sort of a pretty much permanent fixture, the oxygen went out of the tension in the relationship between the Doctor and Amy.
Yeah.
So it sort of, I feel like you get less of an opportunity to focus on those two characters, particularly in the modern show. However, obviously, our favourite period of the show is the John Pertwee era, where you have obviously two central companions, either Liz or Joe or Sarah Jane, plus the Brigadier, plus the unit characters. But that's very much with the show located in a place, right? So it becomes much more of a kind of office-based drama than a kind of sci-fi incident of the week, as it were. That's not to say you can't deviate. The first Doctor, yes, it works in that initial period with Ian, Barbara, and Susan, but isn't it rather tighter when it's just the Doctor and Stephen? Isn't it even, isn't it rather better when it's the Doctor, Ben, and Polly, to go slightly against? But like 4 always seems to be one. Definitely 4 is one too many. 3 can work, but I feel like 2, the Doctor plus one other, is basically your best bet, particularly in the modern form of the show.
I mean, I think I agree, but I think it's like it's sort of, it's interesting that it's. I think you can make more characters work, but it's a pretty high wire act to pull off, because I think what you basically got to have is like a cast of reasonably distinct characters, and any situation. Bearing in mind that Doctor Who is a story where you're going to be doing different things in a different place every single week, generally. What you need is like, do you have, if you're doing 4 characters, the Doctor plus 3, do you have enough characters that are interesting enough on an individual basis to be plugged into any situation and for all of them to be given something to do? The Hartnell era, the Hartnell era sort of always interestingly sort of plays the Doctor as one of an ensemble cast of characters. So you have, Doctor, mysterious, grandfatherly, wise old man, Ian, the action hero, Susan, the slightly otherworldly kid, and Barbara, sort of the moral heart of it. And that is a dynamic that then, yes, okay, I understand how when the TARDIS lands in this location, all of these characters are going to be given something interesting and useful to do. I think the problem sort of that comes in later is as the series, and which it pretty much does as soon as the that first TARDIS crew sort of goes their separate ways, becomes much more about the Doctor, and the Doctor always being the most interesting character in any situation. The later larger TARDIS crews, especially the Davison ones, those characters are not interesting enough for you to want to spend time with when the Doctor's not on screen. I was thinking that bit in The Simpsons where they where Homer plays Poochie, the new character that they're introducing to Itchy and Scratchy, and when he makes some suggestions to the writer, he says like Poochie should be on screen all the time, and when he's not, all the other characters should be asking, "Where's Poochie?" And it's sort of it's almost a bit like that with the Doctor, of like, do you really want to be spending time with Turlough instead of the Doctor? And it's also the Davison one is interesting because they have a large cast of characters, but they always end up pairing the Davison Doctor off with another character to go and do things, which is what makes one of the characters always sort of have to sit the adventure out. If you think in Kinder, for example, which is the one where notoriously Nyssa is like asleep for the whole story in the TARDIS, not really into it. It's not like the Doctor is spending that episode or spending that story like in intense character-based interaction with Tegan and Adric. They pair him off to spend most of his time with like Nerys Hughes's character, who and they have sort of extremely good chemistry. So I think the problem is that none of these characters, in that era are sort of interesting enough to warrant having as much screen time as the story mechanics dictate they need to have as regulars, which is quite often why one of them always blends up into the background. And I think the more elegant solution, as you say, with the Pertwee era, it's these sort of, and the modern series does this a lot actually, sort of that most fruitful sort of place to be, I think, is where you have one sort of essentially main companion, so Joe Grant in the unit era, and then you have these sort of quasi companions who can be there to fulfill a useful role, but if there's a reason why, like basically if the Brigadier doesn't need to have a part in the action in this story, he can not be in this story, and same with the unit guys. And I think that the modern series actually does that a lot, where I would describe sort of characters like Mickey and Captain Jack and Rory before he comes on full time, and sort of even Danny Pink. Sort of Nardole is a TARDIS crew member, I guess, but he has quite a different sort of relationship with the Doctor. It's the relationship is between the Doctor and Bill, and sort of Nardole's almost there in a kind of like, what's that, kind of like Greek chorus kind of way. There's these sort of like quasi companions can work. I also think it's interesting. The one of the things, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a lot more when eventually we come around to doing Flux, but that was, I thought, a concerted effort to create a sort of ensemble cast for Doctor Who, where a lot of those other characters that were in all 6 episodes were, I thought, sort of quite good and quite interesting, without ever having to have that sort of pressure and heft of like, this is your main character. And I think that dynamic sort of worked a lot better for me than, with a smaller, well, you had it was John Bishop and Mandip Gill being the sort of main companions at that point, but it's like, it sort of worked better, I think, than just needing to carry around and artificially find roles for all of these additional characters, which is obviously where they come and stuck previously.
Well, I think the demand for those characters to have a place and a role and great agency comes when they're all in the TARDIS.
Yeah, exactly.
If you are, as a writer, saying, well, our TARDIS team is this person, the Doctor plus one, and you have other characters linked to their place, whether that's unit or some other sort of formulation, the housing estate that Jackie and Mickey are from, but they're rooted or linked primarily to that other place, and so by definition, the writing becomes focused on the impact on that place or the importance of that place. So by linking those ancillary characters to a place or to an identity outside of the TARDIS, then typically they need to be there for a reason. So by definition, the writing will accommodate them better, because it's not just, well, these 3 are in the TARDIS. Like, what are they talking about now?
Yeah.
It's like, well, then the TARDIS lands in the estate, and the TARDIS lands in the estate, which means something is going on in the estate or going on in London, and we need their help. So by locating those ancillary characters, for want of a better way of putting it, those second-tier companions, by giving them a secondary geographical location, a secondary identity, it lends itself to them having a purpose when they're being written about.
There you go. Well, look, we've cracked it. I think if we were to put this up into some sort of formula, it's one companion and then an extended cast of regulars, I would say, is the sweet spot for us, as far as we're concerned. But listeners, viewers, maybe you disagree. Maybe you think maybe you would alight on. Can't believe it. Write to us with your ideal number, just the number, no context. No, write to us. Let us know what you think. You can get in touch with us via all the usual channels. hello@I'llExplainLater.com. Blue Sky. Search for I'll Explain Later. Instagram, Explain Later Pod. If you're watching this on YouTube, leave a comment below the line. And as always, our usual, please get in touch, send this to a friend, give us a 5-star rating, leave a little review, tell people that if like Nick, you had a cracking time listening to this or our Enlightenment episode or any of the others, tell someone about it, even if they might interpret it as a cry for help. But anyway. We will be back next week with another conversation about Doctor Who. But in the meantime, hope you have a lovely week. And we'll see you again soon. Take care.
Take care. Goodbye.